Burke's on his feet. He looks up and gives me a grin and says,
"Hey dude, you too must be from Marin."
Marin County's A-OK, from Tampa, Stinson, all the way to MA. Fresh organic veggies in the market every day. The Dennis, Dylan, and NWA.
This is the Run TMC Podcast. That is the Run the Marin County Podcast, a podcast about sport and people and humanity with an emphasis on the great sport of basketball and the county of Marin. Also great. The Run TMC Podcast is brought to you by Encore Custom Apparel. Encore is a sports design house and manufacturer of customized team uniforms, training, and lifestyle apparel. You can find them in downtown San Rafael on 4th Street and also at www.encorecustom.com. I'm Duffy Ballard, and I'm coming to you from Richmond, London. Richmond, London, home of AFC Richmond, the fictional AFC Richmond, Ted Lasso, Roy Kent, and the Beard. Lovely spot. My co-host, David Levine, is currently at the very end of an Olympic-length vacation in Greece, where he's been going to sandy beaches, visiting the ancient ruins, and searching out coffee all day long. I'm not kidding you. Dave will scout the night before for the next morning's coffee there in Greece. I've never been to Greece, Dave, but you can maybe tell us more. But I understand they have a great coffee culture there, and there are ways to hang out and drink coffee all day long. Sounds lovely. So for those tuning in for the first time to this podcast, first of all, welcome to the Run TMC Podcast. And second, Dave and I usually record our intros to our podcast together. But this is the summertime and we're on break and we're both on vacation. So we're doing a bit of a voice memo podcast here and we're trying something a little bit new. So although this is a podcast about basketball with an emphasis on Marin County, over our 2 seasons, we have taken a meandering journey into other areas, including sports psychology, as well as performance optimization. And we've reveled and dove into the personal stories of some of our guests. And we have gone outside the lines and outside the court and talked about other sports, including America's former pastime, baseball. Last December, we interviewed Thad Levine, who is the former general manager of the Minnesota Twins, and of note, also no relation to Dave Levine. And so we thought that this would be a good time to re-release that interview because, well, first of all, our initial interview occurred in December when it was basketball season, and now it is baseball season, or so I'm told. Second of all, Thad did work with the Minnesota Twins until just last season, and the Twins made some noise at the trading deadline by trading away 10 of their players, including Carlos Correa, who is arguably one of the best players on their roster. So it seemed like good timing for Thad to get out there and tell his story again. Thad, by the way, great storyteller, a lot of funny anecdotes along the way in this interview, and definitely worth a listen. And finally, our friend Thad has recently started his own podcast. It's called Rosters to Rings, and he's co-hosted by Ryan McDonough, who's a former GM in the NBA. So anyway, what we're going to do, Dave, is we're going to jump into this interview with our friend Thad Levine from last December, and Thad will tell his origin story as a general manager in the Major League Baseball. But he didn't start as a general manager. He had to write some letters. He had to get an internship. He had to figure out a way to go from the very bottom of the baseball management ladder to the very top. And then he took another step to become a podcaster. That will be the topic for another episode. So take it away, Thad Levine.
Welcome to the Rosters to Rings podcast, where general managers from all professional sports, like Major League Baseball, the NBA, and NFL, will take you behind the curtain and share their unfiltered experiences and evaluations of the major events in professional sports, both past and present. We will cover the strategies that shape opening day rosters, the pursuit of championship rings, and everything in between. General managers share approximately 40% of what they know and experience. Well, at Rosters to Rings, we're here to share as much of the other 60% as we can with you, the listeners. Please join me, host Thad Levine, Ryan McDonough, and other general managers every week for Rosters to Rings on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
The connection with Thad is a personal one for me. He was a student at Haverford College and my roommate at Haverford College our senior year, and a very good friend. And we lived seniors in the Yarnell house on campus, or just off of campus. There are 13 of us there. And we threw some weekend parties that had a strong dose of the Counting Crows. And Thad, just an amazing all-around person, great athlete, a great D3 athlete, is a very good pitcher at Haverford College, good basketball player as well. He played basketball in high school. We don't really talk about that too much. And as you will notice in the interview, just a really great storyteller, a wordsmith, fun guy, super funny, tells great stories. Also a great family man. His wife, Claudette, was a very good basketball player at Haverford College, and a good friend, even though he's been super busy with his career for the last 25 years or so, just staying in touch. So really appreciated him taking the time out of his pretty busy schedule to sit down and talk with us.
Important disclaimer, no relation to me. I'd never met Thad before this, so we're not distant relatives as far as we know. This was a really great discussion. And for our listeners, particularly like kids out there who are listening, who might want to have a career in sports, and maybe your career won't be on the field or on the court, Thad is a really interesting guy to listen to about how he parlayed just being a really smart, thoughtful people person, plus, a good baseball player, played Division III, was a solid player, not a major league player, but a solid player. And then just being interested and putting in a lot of effort into his career. And he got a job that many of us dream of, being a general manager of a major league organization. I mean, incredible accomplishment. And you can hear Thad talk about it. He's grateful for that opportunity and never took that for granted. So this was a really cool discussion. And Duffy, thanks for bringing Thad on.
Yeah, Thad had a great time. But to our listeners, our next episode will be coming out next week. So first week of January, towards the end of the week. We haven't decided on the exact release date, but it's going to have a lot more MCAL and BCL specific updates from our correspondents around the county as we dig into the upcoming league season for our Marin County team. So we're looking forward to that. We did touch on some local sports, local basketball in this episode, but there's going to be a lot more in the next one. So stay tuned, come back, and thank you for all your support. We appreciate our listeners out there.
Thanks, Duff, and enjoy the Thad discussion. It's great. All right, we are going. Thad Levine, thank you for joining us.
It is my pleasure.
First of all, no relation. Thad and I are not, as far as we know, Thad, we're not related.
We'll be doing DNA swabs after this just to confirm it.
Yes, sponsored by 23andMe. So we're very fortunate to have Thad Levine, former general manager of the Minnesota Twins, Major League Baseball team. Thad and Duffy go way back. They were college friends. Is that correct?
And roommates.
Correct. We were.
College friends and roommates. We're going to try and keep the Haverford dorm discussion to a minimum here. But we're really lucky to have Thad. First of all, Thad, we're a basketball focused podcast, obviously, but we've had a couple episodes that have branched outside of basketball. And namely, more recently, we had an NFL player, Natu Tuatagaloa, who played 6 years in the NFL, who was a Marin guy. And we got really good feedback that, hey, it's cool to kind of branch out from just the dorky, covering pick and rolls. So we're really lucky to have you. But I'd love this conversation to touch on basketball in terms of analytics and some of the more modern aspects of being in a front office, right? That go across different sports. But to start, why don't you give us your background, how your path to becoming a general manager for a major league organization, which is all of our dream.
And my dream as well. I feel utterly blessed to have had the opportunity to work in baseball for the last 25 years of my life. And I think the passion for the sport really started when I was, as crazy as it may sound, when I was 5 years old. I grew up in Northern Virginia. At the time, there was no team in Washington, so the closest team was the Baltimore Orioles. My dad was a avid baseball fan. I think genetically he passed that down to me. Hopefully not male pattern baldness, but who knows, that the day may come. But he definitely passed down a passion for baseball. And he would take my sister, myself, my mom to games, and we would go to about 10 games in Baltimore a year. It was a significant investment on my dad's part. It was an hour and a half each way, so it was 3 hours round trip. We'd usually talk about baseball on the way there and then the game on the way back. But we were sitting down the right field line in between first base and right field. I was sitting on my dad's lap. I remember pretty vividly. I was 5 years old. My dad had a hot dog and a beer in his hand. A foul ball comes into our section. Without hesitation, my dad vaults to his feet, drops me to the ground. Hot dog is mustard side down on my chest. Beer's cascading all over my head. He walks out into the aisle and catches the ball. And he is celebrating as if this was literally the best day of his life. And keep in mind, he had been married to my mother. He had 2 children, but this was unequivocally the best thing that had ever happened to him in his life. I think at the time I was his favorite son, but I was in harm's way on the ground, just disheveled with beer all over me. And he couldn't have been more proud in that moment. And I do hearken back to that a little bit tongue in cheek, but I think to myself of, boy, if I could do something that I love as much as my dad loved in that moment, maybe this is something I want to pursue. And so one of the things that I think my father really instilled in me was the notion that so few people actually know what they're passionate about. You know, if you talk to your parents, your friends, what have you, and you ask, hey, what is your dream job? Most people still say that's a work in progress, or they really have no idea.
Yeah.
So there's a small percentage of us who know what you would love to do. I think there's a far smaller percentage of us who are able to do what we love. And so I was able to do both those things, and I feel so amazingly blessed. So fast forward a long time now. I go through college. Duffy and I graduate from Haverford. I applied to all the Major League Baseball teams at that point, really with no idea of how I could make an impact in a front office. I thought those jobs were kind of systematically for owners' sons and cousins and nephews and whatnot. But nonetheless, I applied to all the teams. And I remember distinctly, I got rejected formally by 4. No responses from the other 26. And I was ecstatic. I was like, I am this close. To date myself, I got formally rejected by Claude Brochu, who was the president of the then Montreal Expos, now a defunct franchise. And I still have that letter to this day. And I felt like this means I'm really close. I then went to work in more conventional business. I worked for the Reebok shoe company, thinking that was a segue maybe into professional sports. About 5 weeks into my employment there, they farmed me out to one of their subsidiaries, which was the Rockport Shoe Company, which at that time, their demographic was men in caskets. If you were in a casket, you were most likely to be wearing Rockport shoes. And I felt at the time that maybe I'd moved a concentric circle away from professional sports as I was focusing on men in caskets. But I ended up getting some great experience there. Ultimately went to business school at UCLA. Between years there, I worked for Coca-Cola, again with the thought in mind that maybe this was going to be a way to access professional sports. In practice, they focus more on soft drinks and water. But I learned a lot about Barq's root beer and how exceptionally poor that Tab tastes. It's really disgusting. There's a corridor apparently of Alabama and Mississippi that won't let Tab go out of business. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but nonetheless, that was true. And then when I graduated from business school, I had a chance to go back to Coca-Cola. I studied abroad in South Africa. My dad came down and visited me. And once again, my dad was the heartbeat of the passion I had for baseball. And I told him that I was turning down the job to go work for Coca-Cola. And it was like the proverbial, I don't know if your listeners have ever heard of this thing called a record, but it was like the needle scratching on a record. My dad was like incredulous that I'd turned down a job to go work for Coca-Cola. He thought that was, a type of company where you set your family up for life, generations of just kind of security. But I told him I'd remove the safety net because I thought if I didn't do that, there's no way that I'd go work in baseball. And I put all my eggs in trying to get a job in a Major League Baseball team. So I applied once again to all the teams. I ultimately, at that time, also recognized there was two sides to working in professional sports. There's the business side. So that's ticketing, marketing, sales, stadium operations. And then there's the sports side, which is running scouting and player development and making the whatever the equivalent of the major league decisions, the roster, whether it be in the NBA, NFL, NHL, Major League Baseball. I definitely wanted to work on the baseball side, but I figured with my education and my work experience, maybe I was going to need to work on the business side for a while. My second year at business school, I was fortunate enough to get an internship with the Los Angeles Dodgers while I was going to UCLA, and I was supposed to work 5 hours a week. I think I worked 50 hours a week, and I was just so fortunate.
Hey, Thad, let me jump in real quick. First of all, record. The kids call it vinyl these days. So. But second, just to context, you played baseball at Haverford, right? So you were a Division III baseball player, and I want to come back to your abilities as a player. But do you think that I assume that experience and your perspective as a player, even though you weren't playing Division I, you weren't going to the major leagues as a player, that must have helped you as you were pitching yourself to these major league teams. Is that fair?
I think it did unequivocally. So it was not necessarily my ability on the field. It was the skills I learned from being an athlete.
Yeah.
So, lessons learned along the way that I didn't know would translate as well as they have to my career was all the things you learn as a teammate. The ability to communicate across a lot of different platforms. We've all played sports with people who come from very different backgrounds and a lot of diversity. There was an ease of operation to communicate with people across a lot of different backgrounds and diversity for me. There was the ability to confront and motivate people and be radically candid with people about the feedback they needed to perform on the field. There was a kind of a standard of excellence that we all created when we were on teams, when we desired to excel. All of those things were massively applicable to the job that I ultimately got as an entry level. And then, as I continued to climb the ladder within my career.
Great. So I apologize. I interrupted you in the middle of so you're an intern for the Dodgers. What are you doing as an intern?
So I was working on the business side. So there was a business development group headed up by a gentleman by the name of Fred Coons. And they had a operation in Vero Beach where they had one of their spring training facilities and minor league operations. And they were contemplating the viability of whether they should sell it or continue to invest in it. And so that was my task, was to determine that outcome. I was also very fortunate while I was there to meet the then assistant general manager, whose name is Bill Guyvet. He took me under his wing and he just asked me innocently one day, "Hey, would you like to stay for a game?" and just kind of learn the baseball side. And then that led to me staying for the next, probably 50 home games and working with Bill and just kind of learning from him, getting exposure. When I graduated from business school, I thought I would get a job with the Dodgers. They sold at the time and there was no opportunity for a job. Interestingly, I applied to all the teams again. I got rejected by the Colorado Rockies for a job in their marketing department. And 10 days later, I was hired to work in their baseball operations department. And I was thinking I would have to work in the marketing department for 5-10 years and maybe try to avail myself to somebody in baseball to be able to make the leap over. And lo and behold, I got hired on the baseball side 10 days later. And that really was the springboard to starting my career.
So anecdotally, Thad, when I was a senior in college, I applied to every Major League Baseball, every NBA team for a job. And I, unlike you were 0 for 4 out of college. I was 0 for like 53, I think. And I have all of my rejection. I still have the rejection letters.
Yeah.
And actually, fans, if you want to go to my Instagram, I posted a video of, I laid them all out on the floor a couple months ago. So I was with you on that, but then you were able to get a job and I was not. And now Duffy's going to point out how dumb I am. Go, Duffy.
No, I want to ask a question. I want to ask about these letters that you sent out. And
Yeah.
How did you frame them? How did you pitch yourselves? Maybe Dave, you first, and then you, Thad.
Yeah.
So Thad, I didn't say this to you, but I was a PR intern for the Oakland A's my senior year of college. I had finished a lot of my classes. I didn't have that many credits left at Stanford. And so I applied to all these teams. The only call I got was the Oakland A's. I interviewed. It was the best interview I've ever had. They were like, who plays right field for us? And do you know how to keep score of a game? What's second base? I'm like, 4. They're like, okay, cool, you're hired. It's not a very rigorous interview. But so I had some experience as an intern, and then I wanted to parlay that into a job. And basically, Duffy, my pitch was, hey, I'm a great guy. I'm super smart, and I want to learn. And I used my experience as a practice player for the women's team. Like, here's an example. I wasn't good enough to play D1 men's basketball, but I was a practice player for the women's team, and I contributed. And they're like, that's great. We don't need you.
I would say pretty similar on my end. I reflect on it. I was so naive. I had no idea what these jobs were or how to get them. So I think I really leaned into my passion for the game of baseball. Once again, dating myself, I went to the World Series with my dad in 1979 and then 1983. My dad's grew up a little bit hard scrabble New York City and is tough skin, but I saw him actually cry in 1979 when the Orioles lost. And I remember writing about that in my letters, saying like that this was passion personified, and I wanted to be part of it. And once again, that did not seem to resonate with most major league front offices at the time.
So just to pause on this, in case we do have some younger people that are listening and are interested in maybe following your path, Thad. So the lesson that I would take from this, which is one that can be replicated in many different aspects of life, is that when you're pitching yourself to an entity, whether it's major league team or a college or whatever, like Jonas Honeck used to say, Dave, it's not about me, or it's not about you, Dave. It's about what you can do for them. And so that means doing your research and trying to find out how you can help them and making it about them and not you. So end of lecture, continue with your story, Thad.
Thank you, Coach Duffy. Go ahead.
Yeah, and anytime I'm happy to get into a little bit more specifics relative to how we have evolved in professional sports in terms of how we do recruit potential candidates. So like we can talk about that at any time that you guys feel is appropriate.
That'll be great. I mean, because look, I think a lot of people listening to this, a lot of people in the world, right? Everybody wants to be a lot of kids want to be pro athletes when they're young. The reality is, it is extraordinarily difficult to be a pro athlete. And so then the next thought is, okay, if I can't play for them, I want to be the GM, or I want to be the president of a major league team. And it's very hard. So, I mean, the fact that you were able to do this and chase the dream and achieve it is just is incredible. And so, yes, I think the recruiting aspect would be really interesting for people to listen to.
So, and Dave, I'm sure you could appreciate this. Like having gone through all of those rejections left me with a real appreciation for people who are applying.
Yeah.
So I never lost sight of the fact that despite the fact that at some point I was 1 year removed, 5 years removed, and then ultimately 25 years removed from getting in, everybody who reached out to me, I tried to respond to personally, just because I know how much that would mean to me if I was sitting in that seat, and I never lost sight of that. But the things that have changed so dramatically in my career regarding hiring is, as you can imagine, the supply and demand is so favorable to the employer here. And by that, I mean, there literally were, 5,000-10,000 applicants for every role that we presented. And so, and this may sound really callous, but this was what I was told early in my pursuit of a job was, the only reason I'm asking for your resume is so I can not waste my own sheet of paper to write at the top who recommended you. And if the name is strong enough to me, then I will continue moving you down the process. But they almost never looked at your resume. There was just this notion of there was this endless sea of people who were applying for these jobs. And so they just could not cycle through all of them. And so if you were recommended by somebody who was close to that person, you were probably going to get consideration. Otherwise, you were just moved to the bottom of the pile. Now we are applying so much more sophistication because these roles, and I know we're going to talk about analytics here in a minute, there's such an amazing competition for the elite people who operate in some of these spaces. And I think professional sports teams have stopped becoming so, arrogant to the notion that everyone just wants to work in sports. And so now we're taking more active roles in going to recruit the right people rather than just sufficing that just because Donnie down the block recommended this guy, we're going to hire them. And so now, there's a lot more, Duff, to your point, like you need to show us what you can do. Like we're asking for work products. We're asking for references. One thing that we became a little bit more attuned to is we wanted to get a reference of somebody who was at your level, somebody who was your boss, and somebody who was your subordinate, because what we were finding is a lot of people can manage down or manage up, but they don't really treat people down very well. So, something at the biggest level of recruitment is players. And when we were going to sign a free agent, we would find out, how do they treat the clubhouse guy, the guy who does his laundry or runs his errands, like the person who maybe they have no reason to treat well? How do they treat that person? Because we started drawing some significant correlation between how they're treating those people and how good of a teammate they were going to be in the locker room. And those things were important to us.
So in business, we can call that 360-degree feedback, right? So you got people above you, below you. And Thad, to bring it back to a topic that we've talked about on this podcast, when we're speaking to kids who are players who are trying to play in college, and we've mentioned this a number of times, like if you're playing club basketball at a tournament, there are college coaches there. The coaches are watching how you're interacting with your teammates. Are you cleaning up after yourself when you leave the bench? Are you leaving water bottles? Or how are you when you're interacting with your parents? How are you at receiving feedback from your coach? So being a human being, right? And everybody in your universe and how you impact them and treat them, that matters. And that's interesting to hear that even at the highest level, when you have these elite athletes who can produce on the field, if they're not treating the clubhouse attendants nicely, if they're not being respectful, that's going to detract from the team and could impact their ability to make the team.
And Dave, I'll take it a step further. When I worked for the Texas Rangers, we were very fortunate to have Russell Wilson kind of at the front end of his career come talk to our minor league players. And the message he gave was the message that his father delivered to him, which was, he told Russell, be the king of every court you're on. And the thought was, somebody is always watching. Assume somebody is drawing conclusions. And this is the reality. When we're reading scouting reports of players, oftentimes you will read words like, hey, this guy is a gamer. And why is he a gamer? Because when they watched him run out a pop-up, he ran it as hard as he could to first base. So they're constantly ascribing traits to you based upon your effort and your attitude. And those are things that every youth coach ever told me. We tell all of our kids, like, whatever you're going to do talent-wise, like, always give your best effort and your best attitude. We watch those things. That is a very legitimate thing. And so how that translates into baseball, and I'm sure this is applicable across all sports, is we would identify our best prospects in the minor leagues. We would intentionally come up to them on a game and say, you are not playing tonight. There is no scenario you're going to get in the game. Go figure out a way to help us win this game. And most guys would be very incredulous. They would ask, like, well, how the hell am I going to do that? I'm used to hitting third, and like I could hit a double in the gap, or I could make a play at shortstop. And we say, no, like, what we want you to do is, when you see your friend on the team go 0 for 2 and kind of slam his helmet down or hang dog it a little bit at the end of the bench, go pick him up, because that may be the guy who's hitting in the 8th inning when the game's on the line. Pick up a tell from the pitcher, whether it's ours or the other teams. Like, keep the manager focused on what's going on. Help us win this game when you're not playing. That's the heart of a champion. And so when we're building a sports franchise, and I think this has a lot of applicability into a workforce too, is we look at it as a living organism. But I can buy muscle every offseason if I so desire. If I'm willing to pay the price in prospects in a trade, or I'm willing to pay the price in dollars in the free agent market, I can go buy home runs. I can go buy RBIs. I can go buy innings pitched. What I can't buy is what I would call the heart and soul player. And the heart and soul person is the guy who genuinely has the innate ability and commitment to elevate the level of play of everyone around them. And that reflects in a front office, that reflects in a workplace, that reflects in a school setting or on the field. Those guys are the ones who are invaluable. And so I look in careers in sports, who are the guys who spent their whole career with one team? And oftentimes, the names are Hall of Famers. They're great players, but they weren't always the best player on the team. They're the players who I imagine were indispensable. And why were they indispensable? Because they raised the level of play of the people around them. They were force multipliers on their teams. So not only were they delivering their talent, they were elevating the level of talent of the people around them. So for young people who are trying to get into sports, whether, as you said, they're trying to pursue their primary dream of being a player, or their secondary dream of potentially being in a front office group for any major sport, what are you doing to help the people around you? Who are you thanking at the end of the day because they helped you, and who's thanking you, and reflect on that, and how does that make you feel? If you're able to raise the level of excellence of the people around you, you will be invaluable in a workplace.
Such a great message. Yeah, Steph.
I can tell you that what I'm doing to elevate Dave in this podcast is I'm giving him an endless supply of iced coffee whenever he wants it, sometimes remotely. You're welcome, Dave.
Emailing me iced coffee doesn't work as well. By the way, side note, I don't know how Thad didn't have a career in radio because his voice is, I would say, dulcet tones. I'm
far too kind.
So that's a great message. And I mean, look, obviously there are table stakes, right? You need to be athletically capable. You need to have the chops, but there are a lot of people that are really good at stuff. It's that next level is being the entire human being, right? So
and allow me to make my first segue into the NBA. But when I was in Texas, we had the opportunity to speak with Mark Cuban with some degree of frequency. He was a big baseball fan, but he was a really attentive person to team dynamics. And what he said was, relative to your commentary about talent, is obviously talent plays, right? Like that isn't going to perfectly, like your attitude won't perfectly supersede talent. You have to have a base level of talent. Functionally in baseball, there are 20 rounds times 30 teams. There's 600 players drafted every year. About 4 to 7% of any draft class makes it to the major leagues. Only 3% of those have a career that spans more than 4 seasons. So the question then you want to ask yourself is, why do certain players who you feel are like not as talented excel? Why are certain players who are exceptionally talented not excel? Mark Cuban's take on that was, if you're not a genuinely good teammate, if we don't know that the day we acquire you, we're going to find that out and we're going to get you the heck out of our community. And on the flip side, I look at a player like David Ross, who was, I reflect on him in this instance, because when the Cubs finally broke their streak and won the World Series, to a man, there were so many super talented players on that team. Chris Bryant, Rizzo, Zobrist, Baez, and the person they all attributed their success to was David Ross, who was the backup catcher at the time. And it made me wonder, why is this person drawing all of their attention? And it's because he was a heart and soul guy. He was the guy who set a standard of excellence in their clubhouse. He was far from the most talented player on the team. His talent alone probably should have curtailed his career far in advance of that. Instead, he's a World Series champion for a franchise that had never won before. And all these guys who are superstar talents are attributing their success to him. And so I think, when you look at Mark Cuban's commentary, whether you're in a workplace, whether you're in a team, group setting for a homework assignment, you recognize that people who are prepared to go above and beyond, they're not always the most talented person. If they are, they're Hall of Famers. If they're not, they're just somebody who's going to prolong their careers, and they're somebody you're going to always want to be around. Be one of those people.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah, and I would say, I don't know Steph Curry personally, but obviously being in the Bay Area and watching him and hearing about him from my brother who spent time with him, he seems like he's one of those guys who has both, right? Like, he has the elite talent and desire and competitiveness, but he also has the elite ability to be a team player and bring the best out of his teammates. And that is definitely the rarest of unicorns. LeBron, probably similar. Seems like there are others we can mention in the sport of basketball. Maybe easier in basketball than in other sports, right? Because you only have 5 players out at a time. One great player can make more of a difference than one great player in the sport of baseball.
Well, it's a smaller roster. Football, as we talked about with Natsu, football, the roster's 53 in the NFL, and college is even a larger roster. And baseball, what's the major league? Was it 26? How many people are on?
Yes, we're 26 now.
Yeah. So whereas in basketball, you've got probably a 15-person roster in the NBA and WNBA. Culture matters everywhere. And Duff, I think Steph is a perfect example, and that's why Steph is uniquely well known around the world as being this paragon of athletic excellence. And I think obviously his skill is incredible, but he's also just a great teammate. He's a great person. You never hear people say that Steph was a jerk to them. You never hear any scandals about him. Even when there's controversy going on the Warriors, like Durant and Draymond are getting in fights, Steph is the voice of reason. He's he's unique in that way because of who he is as a human.
And to me, as a zealot of sports, like he's also the personification of overachievement and work ethic.
Right.
You know, coming out of Davidson and being the size he was, obviously he has a pedigree in his family, his father, his brother, but like there's this sense of like he's the one of the few guys in the NBA who look like so much of us and give us hope that, you know, as you know, somebody who's not 6'8" and exceptionally, you know, well built, like you can still excel in life, and you attribute all these positive attributes to him as a result of that.
Yeah. So absolutely. Thad, but there's so many things we could talk about, but I do want to get back to one thing. So you were taking us through your path. I'm interested in how you went from, so you're with the Rockies, you're working your way up at the Rockies, and you also mentioned the Rangers was a stop along the way. How do you get to general manager of the Twins?
Yeah. So I think that the real answer is I got a chance to work with exceptional people who invested in my growth and development. And it started in the Colorado Rockies. Dan O'Dowd was the general manager at the time. He had two strategies which really accelerated my growth. One was, he said out loud, is he tried to surround himself with people who he deemed to be smarter than he was. And I got to benefit from that because a lot of the people who I got a chance to work with there, I think 6 or 7 of us went on to be general managers, which was, you know, unique at the time. Josh Burns goes on to be a 2-time general manager. Michael Hill's a general manager. Jerry DiPoto, a general manager. Scott Service is a manager of a big league team. Matt Klentak was a general manager. John Daniels was a general manager. Billy Epler was a general manager. And I got to work with all those guys. And we were all kind of on the front end of our careers. And so we were really learning all together. So that was one strategy Dan employed, which was very beneficial to me. The second one was he really subscribed to a theory of throw you in the deep end and see if you can swim. And if you could swim, he would throw a barracuda in there. If you survived that, he threw a shark in, and then he threw a toaster that was plugged in. And like, it wasn't for everybody. A lot of people got weeded out along the way. But for those of us who survived, it was like a total immersion course. And I was learning, for every year, I was learning 2 to 3 years of baseball, you know, fundamentals, but also leadership qualities from Dan and that group. So I think I was really fortunate to work with some exceptional people who were generous enough with their time and their experience to invest in my growth and development. So that really helped me get from Colorado to Texas. So one thing that's unique about baseball is that there's not a freedom of employment. So when you work for a team, you are kind of indentured to that team. So the only jobs I could consider were the ones that were presented to me. And so one thing that is very popular in baseball is you get married at the All-Star break. Ladies love that. And then you go on your honeymoon in the off season. So it just so happened the Friday that I was leaving for my honeymoon, the Texas Rangers called to interview me to be their assistant GM. And there was an applicant pool. There were 4 or 5 of us interviewing. So while I was in Italy and Greece with my wife, we were enjoying ourselves during the day. And then from like 2 to 6 a.m. for 5 straight nights, I was interviewing back in Texas. Ultimately got the job offer while we were having gelato one morning in Texas. I mean, in Italy. It was a glorious morning, and took the job with Texas to be their assistant GM. Got a chance to work there for 11 years. We went to the playoffs, I think 6 or 7 of those years, and went to the World Series twice, which was just an absolutely phenomenal experience. I think the success we had in Texas, coupled with all of the people who had influenced me throughout my career, put me in a very good position to be a general manager candidate, which ultimately came to fruition in Minnesota. And I got a chance to spend the last 8 seasons in Minnesota as a GM. And once again, I just feel absolutely blessed to have had these opportunities.
Thank you for tracing us through your career path. And I know, you're in a place right now where you're considering next steps, and the arc is not complete. It is going to extend. But I want to take us back to starting in Colorado, 1999 or so. This is pre-Moneyball. And as I know, one of the things you were tasked with, because I remember you doing this, was early analytics. And this is just like on one of those huge keyboards, and an internet connection that beeps at you like when you're getting logged on. And I know also that your approach and your thought process with regards to analytics in baseball has evolved over time. So maybe just take us through like the early analytics, and then how your thinking maybe has evolved over time, and in particular with sort of player assessment and evaluation.
Absolutely. So I think one of the amazing things, and this happens in all facets of life, is just like the evolution of professional sports and what's going on behind the scenes. And I'll just highlight a few, and I'll tie them into analytics across the board here. Is when I started in baseball, there were about 6 or 7 people working in the average front office, and we were probably collectively doing about 15 jobs. So probably for worse, there was a kind of a homogeneity of the people who were hired in baseball at that time. And in large regard, a lot of us had played baseball up to a certain point, never in the major league level. We all kind of had captain's mentality. So there was a real esprit de corps and teamwork element. We collaborated well. We socialized extremely well together, and we worked very hard together. So there was a work hard, play hard kind of environment. But at that time, analytics was really, really fledgling, so we were relying on Bill James. Bill James put out multiple books every year, and we would all diligently read, he would translate stats from one stadium to another stadium, and we would have to punch the numbers into this massive spreadsheet and create these algorithms ourselves to figure out what did that mean. And as Duffy, as you were referencing there, starting my career in Colorado, one of the most unique environments to play professional sports, like we were forever trying to figure out what did it mean to play at altitude. The ball traveled further, the ball from pitchers spun less. And so like pitching was different, hitting was different there, recovery was very different there. So what we were finding out was that if the average baseball game is played at 7:00 at night and you finish it around 10, but it takes 24 hours to recover from exerting yourself at altitude, you were never fully recovering. And so what was happening over a 7 or 10 game homestand is these guys were becoming exceptionally fatigued. And so it would not show up during that homestand, but when you then went on the road, your performance was degraded significantly. We were seeing that not only in the home team, but also the visiting teams who came through. And so we started recognizing in that moment, we had to do statistical analysis that transcended just understanding how to calculate batting average, on base percentage, and slugging percentage. So I think in Colorado, we were kind of thrust into a position where we kind of had to understand a little bit earlier than most what did analytics start meaning. But the evolution in it has been exceptional. So I'll just trace a few examples of this. When I started, most general managers had a very specific profile. They were kind of like faces of franchises. They were charismatic wheelers and dealers. They were gunslingers. Sometimes your fan base knew them because they were exceptionally charismatic and had these tremendous personalities. And we would talk about like, hey, do you make decisions based upon your gut or the book? And people would often say like, well, what the hell's the book? It's like always the gut. And like, how far have we come? Like they were emotional decision makers. And you know what? Fans loved them because they were prone to reaction, sometimes overreaction to what a competitor did. And if the Yankees went out and did something, well, the Boston Red Sox were going to counterpunch. If the Dodgers did something, the San Francisco Giants were going to counterpunch. And they were doing it a little bit capriciously without a lot of data. Now we fast forward, general managers' profiles look very, very differently. People are coming from, conventional business backgrounds. They are very sound decision makers. We talk about it where every decision we make now is grounded in the data. What I try to add to that is, but we also make every decision humanly because our products are human. They're not inanimate objects. And so we can't truly reduce this to formulas. But where analytics, I think, really showed up on the scene was, Bill James, the foundation. Then you have Moneyball that really elevated it. And I think we started seeing it most in advanced scouting. So when we were preparing our major league players for the opposition, we started employing new statistics, which heretofore we never looked at. So we were looking at, not only pitchers' tendencies. It was easy to tell a hitter, hey, on an 0-2 count, this pitcher throws 62% sliders. But now, so that was the first iteration of it. Now we've gotten to the point where we can tell you, hey, based upon your swing path, you align best with these 3 pitchers in their stable. So be prepared to hit these guys because your swing path aligns best with their pitch mixes. And so we're educating coaches. It used to be that when we prepared our players for a series, we would get all 13 pitchers in a room. We would break down every hitter and tell them all the exact same information. Now, forget the fact that a third of the guys in the room speak Spanish and probably didn't understand most of what was going on. And also, I'm telling you that, hey, this guy can't hit a curveball, and a third of the guys in the room can't throw a curveball. So it doesn't really matter to them. Now we're individualizing every one of these conversations. And the conversation now is coach, catcher, and pitcher, so that everyone's getting educated, but it's a singular approach. So gone are the days where you have the New York Yankees way of playing baseball, or the Twins way, or the A's way of playing baseball. It's all individualized. So now we're attracting different managers. The managers used to be field generals, and they could really glower at an umpire or kick dirt on them and
Earl
intimidate
Weaver.
the opposition. Right. Exactly. We all know these guys, the Sparky Andersons and Earl Weaver and Gene Mox of the world. And now they start giving away to these guys who are actually like almost therapists. They're guys who can individualize lessons, because what we found is teams were having an arms race to get more information, more data, more analytics. But the goal here is not to get the most information, it's to implement the most information to inform our decision making and to ultimately help our players excel on the field. So now we needed to find people who could translate that information. So another evolution in the game comes due to analytics, which is coaches heretofore, the criteria was, have you played minor league or major league baseball? Great. You could be a coach in major league or minor league baseball. Now we're looking for more sophistication. We want people who have, psychology backgrounds, but people who have teaching backgrounds and know paradigms of how to communicate through visual tools, audio tools, and hands-on tools. And so now all of these analytics folks who used to be in a dark room somewhere, we would occasionally throw a ham steak in there and let them feed and then a bottle of Febreze to clean themselves off. They're now in the clubhouse. And so in the Minnesota Twins, our manager, Rocco Baldelli, got to a point where he put these guys in uniform. They got out on the field pregame because we found out that our second baseman learned best when he was turning double plays and could just talk to somebody. So we put our analyst, who is our hitting specialist, on the field with him. He turned double plays with him and told him, oh, by the way, here's what you should expect from the pitcher tonight from the Seattle Mariners. And so it's just become such an integrated standpoint. The other thing I want to just bring in, because basketball deserves a ton of credit here, Billy Beane is kind of one of the forefathers of analytics in baseball, but a lot of this stems from Daryl Morey. He was the one who transformed each and every one of our baseball models for the draft. One of the key learnings that he had was he came to the awareness that if you are older than your competitors in college, you usually do better, and that doesn't translate well once you get into the pro level. So now every amateur model in baseball, talent is the key. Secondary is how old you are. So if you are younger and performing at least as well, if not better than your competitors, that bodes exceptionally well to future success. If you're older than your competitors, and even if you're dominating at your level, that doesn't. And so that was something that Daryl Morey, he had a revelation, and that's something now that baseball uses across the board. I think what Bob Myers is doing, what Sam Presti is doing, is significantly impacted baseball. Like they have been on the forefront of making decisions on the margins that have meaningfully impacted their franchises. And make no mistake, people in baseball are looking for best practices well outside of the game of baseball, and they look to basketball with some consistency.
Well, earlier in an episode, Duff and I were discussing, I mentioned a podcast that I'm really liking called Glue Guys, which Alex Smith and Shane Battier are involved in. It's great. And the whole concept is, whether it's business or sports or any walk of life, you have people on your team who are the quote unquote glue guys who, build culture, keep everybody together. And Shane Battier is a perfect example of what you're talking about, Thad, where Daryl Morey, he was on my list of questions for you, because he changed definitely the game of basketball. He was the Billy Beane of basketball in terms of introducing analytics. And Shane Battier is a great example of someone who, obviously a great player in high school, was National Player of the Year, great player at Duke, but didn't jump out as someone who was going to be a superstar in the NBA. He didn't have exceptional athleticism. He wasn't a top level scorer, but Daryl Morey realized that Shane Battier wins games for us. And it's his defensive presence, his ability to move the ball. He's perfect in his spots on the floor. And it was analytics showing that he is very effective in shutting that. He was great against Kobe. He could guard the other team's best players. He was versatile. And so that was an example where analytics built that career for Shane Battier, and he went on to win NBA titles with Miami. He had an unbelievable career. So I'm glad you brought up Daryl Morey, because I think he had a huge impact on the game. Yes, Duffy.
First of all, Dave, I want to mention I just looked up Bill Simmons' age. He's 55. So that means, with us being younger,
We're younger.
we're younger. So,
Well, well, Duffy, I'm younger. I don't know where you are, but I'm younger than both of you guys. So there you go. Thad, true story. I saw Bill James speak when I was like 14 years old. He came to a clean, well-lighted place for books, Marin people, Larkspur Landing. I had every Bill James baseball abstract. He was absolutely my hero, and he was the one who started it in the 70s. He was breaking down analytics, and then obviously Billy Beane changed the whole complexion of sports with Moneyball and the Oakland A's. One question for you, Thad, related to all this analytics stuff. What's the ultimate goal? Is it to win games, or is it to build a profitable business for the owner?
No.
Is it just winning, or and then everything else will follow, or are they trying to have a more exciting product on the field so that you sell more tickets? Curious.
Yeah, I think it's actually a wonderful question, and I will say throughout my career, when I've had opportunities to pursue jobs with other franchises, that's the central question I want to be able to answer. And so, what I have found is that I think if you look across all sports, success is there's three pillars to success. You look at the relationship with the owner, the general manager, and the manager of the team. If you have everybody on the same page, rowing together, like, you could have sustained success. If you have two of the three working together, but one working against it, you're going to have fleeting success. If you have franchises where that it's all discombobulated, there is no success. And I think we could all think of franchises across sports, and you wonder why is this franchise? It's 20 years since they last won. I say, look no further than that triumvirate. It's probably a franchise that fires their manager or head coach like all too frequently. You look at the Pittsburgh Steelers, like they're the bastion of this. They've had whatever it is, 3 head coaches in the last 50 some odd years, and they've had continuity and tremendous success. So I always ask the question, because I think the backbone of all of that is the owner, is when I'm pursuing opportunities, I want to know, does the owner want to win, or does the owner want to break even? And they're entitled to pursue either of those things. I'm a lot more motivated by an owner who aspires to win. And
Thad, just to interject, I am a diehard Oakland A's fan. So what you're saying is piercing my heart right now, but please continue.
Yeah. So, like at the heart of it, Dave, the fundamental of this, right, is that we're all fans, regardless of whether we work for a team or not work for a team. Like, I am fundamentally a fan, and I want to believe that the owner is prepared to do what it takes to win. And so, like when you study winning franchises in baseball, like they all have done the same thing. At some time, they've stepped outside of their payroll comfort zone to try to pursue excellence. They've all done that. The ones who are not the exceptionally high payrolls. They're about 64% of playoff berths go to the top 10 payrolls in baseball. So that means there's 36% that go to the other team. I have spent my whole career working in non-top 10 payroll environments. So we're studying what the bottom 20 payrolls do and how they excel in the playoffs. And the answer is, at some point, the owner has to step up and be willing to spend a little bit beyond their comfort zone. And if they do that, those teams can spike up as well. And so, I think that is fundamental to a fan's pursuit of a team. But it's also, when you're working in sports, like, you want to know that your owner is committed to winning at some level. It doesn't have to be year in and year out, but it has to be when the time is to strike that they're prepared to step up and do so.
Thad, I want to take you back to analytics again. I think we all agree as fans with that perspective, and it's great to hear that someone who's been in the business doesn't get jaded by the business. But I want to go back to analytics and just ask the question of, as a GM, when you're evaluating a free agent and you're trying to bring in some free agents to the team, and I know you and I have talked about this offline, but how much are you looking at what your analytics tell you about how this player did over 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? What's their projected performance in a new ballpark, a new city, like in Colorado, perhaps? And then the intangibles that you already talked about, in terms of the 360-degree review. What are they going to bring to the clubhouse? What are the needs of the team? And does that all fit into one model, or are you kind of looking at the numbers and then you're looking at the intangibles and then you're looking at the money, of course, and then you're trying to make it all sort of coalesce? Is there one model for that, or you just kind of have to look at a couple different calculations and make a decision?
Yeah. So I think at the heart of that question is how confident are the systems in which you've built? And I will say one thing I've learned over my career is you don't just build one of these models and immediately have faith in it. So teams that have done exceptionally well in baseball that are well known, the Tampa Bay Rays, the Milwaukee Brewers, even the Los Angeles Dodgers now have invested a ton in analytics. As just a point of reference, my understanding of the NBA is most analytics departments are somewhere between 3 and 7 people. The average baseball group is probably closer to 15 to 20, and then the Dodgers have a whole offsite building dedicated to their staff of analysts. So baseball is investing a lot more in headcount in this space, and so it's starting to inform every decision that is made. So I would say, if you're kind of on the front end of building out these systems, you're still aggregating a lot of information from other sources, including the ones that are public to our fans. Baseball really looks at fan graphs. They have steamer projections on there. We're very want to factor that in. And there are a bunch of other, public sources that we're using where we kind of meld them with our own models to see if we're getting additional information. So there's crowdsourcing, so to speak, in those cases. Where I personally interacted with these models is I think they are very informative in building out a preliminary rankings of players, and you shouldn't stray too far from what the models say. And once again, for fans back home, it's saying this player should, over a large time horizon, do better than player A should do better than player B. That doesn't mean in the next year they definitely will do that, but just if you're taking this pool of players who performed like that player in the past, they tend to perform like this in the future. I think then you have to make these decisions humanly. So you're moving the list up and down. So what we tried to stay disciplined to is that the systems would create bands of players. So there would be a band of players. Let's say as we're preparing for the draft, there are 8 players that you could consider for the first pick in the draft. It's then up to the scouts to determine how you want to rank within those 8 players. But what you can't do is take player 9 and jump them into the top group, because the band suggests there is a distinct break. But what we're saying is the systems can't tell you with 100% confidence that 1 through 8 is exactly right. So we now want to apply some of the human elements that don't show up. It is the work ethic. It is the makeup. It is an injury profile on a player that models can't perfectly predict. One thing that's unique to every human being is their pain threshold. Some players in sports can play through significant injuries and play very well. Others can't play through very mild injuries. And so it's understanding all of those additional elements. You move guys up and down. We talked about Daryl Morey earlier. The age thing is a real thing. So one of the best acquisitions we made in Minnesota was signing Nelson Cruz, who at the time I believe was a 39-year-old designated hitter. No model is favoring a 39-year-old turning 40 years old. I think most women can say once you're past 30, men are basically useless. And so there's no difference in that in sports. And so every model is going to devalue somebody who is over a certain age, and over a certain age is really young 30s. So when you're in your late 30s, models are going to really degrade that player. So a model alone will never encourage you to sign a 39 to 40-year-old player. It's going to take a scout to stand up and say, these are the reasons why I think this guy can fight Father Time for 1 more year, and here are all the other intangibles they can bring. Carlos Santana is another perfect example of that. Both he and Nelson Cruz had tremendous leadership ability. They helped the Minnesota Twins immeasurably. They also performed very well on the field. They did defy aging, but more than that, they had some leadership skills that we determined even if they didn't perform as well, they still were going to deliver significant value in the clubhouse.
Is there a bias to college players versus, so let's look at the draft as opposed to free agents. Do you have a preference for a college player who's got more experience versus a high schooler? Discuss that.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest differences between the baseball draft and let's say the football and basketball drafts is we never draft for positional need. And mostly because it takes typically 3 to 5 years for a player to make it to the big leagues. And so anything can happen in that time. Whereas, in the NBA, maybe you're really optimizing for a power forward or you're optimizing for a running back in the NFL draft. We don't have that. So we're always taking the best player available. And so to answer your question, Dave, there are models that suggest a riskier profile as a high school pitcher. There's just more that can go wrong health-wise for that player historically than a high school position player or a college pitcher or a college position player. Secondarily, I think as an industry, we found pitching in areas that you wouldn't expect, whereas most of the best hitters in the game come from the top of the draft. So I think most teams, not all, but most teams are putting a little bit more emphasis on drafting position players towards the top of the draft, high school or college. Secondarily, college pitching, and then fourth of all would be high school pitching, just because of the risk profiles. That's not saying anything about what we think about the talent. It's more about just the health profiles of those subsets of players moving forward.
I'm curious for your perspective about continuing with this college thing. So you played Division III baseball. Rarely you see it. There are NBA players who play Division III basketball, like Duncan Robinson's the best example, right? He was played at Williams, Division III, transferred to Michigan, got drafted, been a really solid pro for the Miami Heat. That's a Division III basketball player who went on to play in the NBA. Are there Division III baseball players or Division II baseball players who have gone on to play in Major League Baseball, and kind of discuss your view on how big is the spread between a Division III baseball player and a Division I baseball player?
As a Division III baseball player, I'm reticent to tell you this, but there's a major gap. I think there's a real significant gap. And there have been Division III players drafted. There have been exceptionally few that have actually made it to the big leagues. You know, as we were talking about earlier, if about 4 to 7% of every draft class is making it to the big leagues, there's a really, really small subset of that who are Division III to begin with, let alone who get to the big leagues. So I do think the exceptions to that would be people who just mature physically later, you know, because it is, as is every sport, it's based on power. Whether that's velocity on the mound or that's power at the plate. And so if you're developing later, you've got, I think, a puncher's chance. But the reality is it's when you look at the players who excel in Major League Baseball, it's an exceptionally steep curve relative to if you're picked top 5 in the draft, you have a much higher chance in the next 5. And by the time you get out of the first round, you're starting to get into infinitesimal numbers of success, as defined as playing more than 5 years in the big leagues. There are examples of those guys, without question. But I think the equivalent, Dave, in baseball is players who come from the non-warm weather states. So when you come out of the Northeast, the Northwest, even a little bit in the Midwest, you are playing far fewer games than the kids who come out of the Southeast in the South. And so the equivalent in baseball is, you know, the guy who comes out of the Ivy Leagues, or, you know, Mike Trout, who came out of New Jersey. You know, these are guys who just have played far fewer baseball games than the kids who grew up in Georgia, Texas, California. The preponderance of Major League players are coming from those 3 states alone. And so that I think is the equivalent of the Division III discussion, is the guys who go to schools in the Northeast and play a fraction of the games that their counterparts did in the South. And that a lot of those kids have excelled. You know, another thing that we talk about in sports, and we say this to our kids all the time, is we want you to play multiple sports. You know, one thing that we did with the Twins is we told our scouts in the offseason, go scout basketball, go scout a track meet, tell us who the best athlete is there, and maybe we want to try to convince them to play baseball. So there have been examples of that too, where we've, like, back in the day in Colorado, we drafted a quarterback out of Virginia Tech named Michael Vick. Just because at one point we got a point to the draft and we said to the scouts, who's the best athlete on the board? And they said unequivocally, it's this kid out of Virginia Tech. His name is Michael Vick. We should just see if he wants to play baseball. So we drafted him. He ultimately, obviously stayed in a football career. But nonetheless, like, I do think we're looking in different ranges to try to find players. Unfortunately, for those of us who played Division III sports, not many of them are coming from there for baseball.
When you see those multiple sport athletes, super high level multi-sport athletes, like the one that comes to mind for me is Kyler Murray, right? And the A's were very high on him. I think they picked him first. Obviously, he opts to go to the NFL and has had a very good career with the Cardinals. What do you think drives a player like that? Russell Wilson's another one, right? Who you mentioned him, could have played Major League Baseball. Arguably has had a great career as a quarterback with the Seahawks, won a Super Bowl, now with the Steelers. What drives them to go play football versus baseball?
So I think
money?
Yeah. Yes. Well, I think there are a few factors working against baseball. I'll list a few. One is in the college space, there are fewer scholarships for kids playing baseball than there are basketball and football. So just fundamentally, it's tougher to go to college and have it subsidized to play baseball.
Sure.
Two is I think historically it's just more expensive to play baseball, whether that's the travel teams, but it's also the fundamental equipment. Playing basketball requires a ball, and everyone can play with one ball. Like in baseball, unfortunately, bats, gloves cost a lot of money. And so there's a financial investment on the front end. And then third of all is there's a farm system. There's 3 to 5 years of playing minor league baseball and at a very low salary. Whereas in the NFL and the NBA, there's a little bit more of a development of the G League now, where there's more of a minor league feeder system. But by and large, historically, if you got drafted and played in the NBA or the NFL, you went straight to the NBA and the NFL, and you got to play. So the road to get to where the hallowed ground of playing professional sports is the longest in baseball. I think it also is the most expensive, and it's the least beneficial to the college athlete relative to scholarship money. I think those three things have led to a real attrition in baseball of athletes. And, one of the time-honored conversations about baseball is approximately 33% of all professional baseball players, minor league and major league, come from Latin America now. About 7% are African American. And those two numbers are working in opposition. Every year we're gaining ground for the Latin American players, and we're losing ground for the African American players. And I think a lot of those premium athletes in the United States are moving away from baseball, even though, as you referenced, Kyler Murray, Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston was another tremendous baseball player growing up. Like, they're just going to other sports for some of the reasons we just discussed.
So as a GM, obviously everybody's dream to be the GM. I will say, as an observer, it seems like a very stressful job. So as a kid, you think, man, GM, it's like, I think kids view the GM as like having your own fantasy football team or fantasy baseball team or fantasy basketball team. Yeah. The reality is it's a hard job. You're negotiating with agents, you're managing owner expectations. It's pressure filled. How did you deal with the pressure of being a GM?
I honestly, and I don't mean to sound glib in this regard, I think I always maintained perspective that I got a chance to work in professional sports and it was fundamentally entertainment. And so I think I always managed stress by realizing I had a lot of friends who were emergency medicine doctors who were doing things a lot more dire than what I was doing. And so I think maybe this was just where I was genetically predisposed to excel in this environment, because I processed stress and I think in a very healthy fashion by always keeping in perspective what we were doing. But Dave, I'd say that where it showed up for me was it's a very demanding career path. So it's glorious. I wouldn't give it up for the world. That said, there's a lot of sacrifices associated with your time. So the extent to which I reflected on my career when I was in it, and I forever will, is like where you're falling short potentially for your family. Where I reconciled that was, and that created some stomach acid for me when you knew you were missing an important event for your child in the name of watching the 103rd baseball game of the season, because that was your bounden duty. The reality, and once again, I'm not complaining about this, but you were on call 365 days a year. Like, there was no time in which you couldn't be reached, and you needed to be accessible to everybody all the time. And so that really interfered with your ability to be, dare I say, like a normal father and a normal husband to your wife. And so, there weren't summer vacations. Every spring break, the kids got a chance to go to where you were spring training. And so 7 weeks a year, I was separated from the family to go to spring training. And it was a glorious time, but it also took a toll on the family. There are a lot of night games, a lot of weekend games. So I think that was where you felt the pressure. I will say, you mentioned a few guys that, I witnessed some chair throwing. Some people with expletives and breaking a lot of phones. And it's like, I just never realized that wasn't my way of processing some of the stresses and strains of the game, because I just knew I had no control over it. But I certainly witnessed a lot of that in my career.
So quick question, Thad, as a friend and as a physician, I'm a little worried about your stomach acid here. And I want to ask specifically, so if we're talking about Scott Boras, how much stomach acid has that one individual sort of created for you over the course of your career? Are we talking like ounces, cups, gallons?
Yeah.
Fan Scott Boras is a super agent in Major League Baseball.
Yeah, so he's probably the most well-known and preeminent agent. And when you think of all the movies you've seen, when you see relations between agents and front office people, I think he may be one of the lead actors.
It's like
some of them.
Lee Steinberg and Boris are kind of the two main ones.
Yeah. And so I actually always have enjoyed interaction with agents. I think what fans maybe don't know, because we're leaning into our knowledge based upon movies and whatnot, and Jerry Maguire, and like that, there's always this perception that there's this confrontation between front office executives and agents. The reality is the best agents I've worked with care as much about their players' excellence as we do. So there's no better outcome than we need to pay a player a lot of money, and that means he's performed exceptionally well for us. And so when you talk about a guy like Scott Boras specifically, I'm not sure there's a better agent in the game who invests in the progress of his own players. Sure, you can say that serves him well, because then they'll earn more money for him. But in practice, it also serves the team well because they're performing well for the team. And so he was one of the few agents who not only would negotiate a deal with you, but then after the deal was negotiated, he checked back in very frequently to say, hey, why isn't my guy playing better? What do we need to do to support you, to help him get motivated to get back on the field and not just rest on his laurels that he's got a 5-year deal for $120 million. So I would say there definitely were some, about 5% of my time with agents would be kind of the contentious negotiation. The other 95% was working towards a common goal, which was getting the best out of the players that they represented. And so I always viewed it as a relationship. My approach to negotiation was always, I wanted to learn what mattered to the agent the most. And some guys wanted the most money. Some guys wanted the longest deal. Some guys wanted to know that their guy was going to be able to play a specific position. But each of those, like, it was scouting, it was talent evaluation. Most fans know that conventionally. I'm looking at 3 point guards and I can tell you who has the best handle. What it was for me was scouting every guy I negotiated with, whether that was a fellow general manager for another team or whether that was an agent, and understanding their kind of like their tendencies, so that every time I talked to Scott Boras, the negotiation was better than the previous one because I learned from the previous one. So I viewed these guys more as partners in the pursuit of excellence for their players than I ever did as confrontational.
That's great. All right. We've been going for a while. I've got a few more, and I know Duffy has a few more too for you. So this is a Bay Area podcast. I would be remiss if we did not ask you for your perspective on, we have two different, well, we have one Bay Area team. We have one team that's temporarily in Sacramento on their way to who knows where, theoretically Vegas. But let's start with the Giants. I'd say, as I mentioned, I'm an A's fan. I think the vast majority of people in the Bay Area are Giants fans. Discuss the Giants franchise. Obviously, you've had great success, a couple World Series. It's been a while, though. So what are your thoughts on the Giants?
Just to piggyback on that question, Dave, that if you could give us, when you talk about the Giants, maybe I would like to hear a bit of a focus on what you would expect them to do in the offseason. Same with the A's. And then where would you sort of ballpark them for next season? And I did also want to mention, maybe you could touch on this or not, but when you guys ended up with Carlos Correa and he had signed with the Giants and then left, it sounds like he was the number one criteria he was looking for was a team that was going to win. And as I recall you telling me, he was most concerned about whether or not the Twins were going to implement analytics that would get you to the same spot as, some of these other power teams like the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Red Sox.
Yeah. Yes. So please, I'll let me just start answering a few of those questions. If I miss any, please just ping me back. So the San Francisco Giants, so the challenges that they face are a few significant. Fundamentally, they're in the National League West with some of the behemoths of the game. And further to that point, I think they're in one of the divisions with the best and brightest general managers of the game. So there's a highly competitive landscape. Not only are they with some of the bigger payrolls, see the Dodgers and then the Padres certainly flirted at a level that we referenced earlier, where their owner was willing to go to a level they heretofore had never been. But, oh, by the way, the Arizona Diamondbacks were in the World Series now 2 seasons ago. And The Colorado Rockies have kind of buoyed that division as the one team that has not necessarily been as formidable. But 4 of the 5 teams are bona fide playoff contending teams. And you have some really elite intelligences in the front offices for those groups. So I think you are fighting a very challenging battle in San Francisco on a number of fronts, and that's before we even get on the field. Another element, I think, of San Francisco, which is a unique challenge, maybe opportunity, but unique challenge, is the configuration of the field and how it plays. So it plays extremely favorably to pitching, which is great because that makes it a lot easier to recruit pitchers. But it's very disadvantageous to offensive players, and it's very difficult to recruit hitters there. So anecdotally, we hear in the game that if a player has their choices between San Francisco and other places, and they're an offensive player, they may choose other places because the perception is there's going to be a real degradation of their offensive performance if they come to San Francisco. So I mentioned those things as a little bit behind the scenes things that San Francisco is working with. I also would point to, there are teams, the Baltimore Orioles, as an example, have now reconfigured their field twice because they recognized they had the opposite issue. They couldn't recruit pitchers because it was such a hitter-friendly environment. So they moved the left field fence back. They now have realized they moved it back too far, so they're making another adjustment. The Detroit Tigers similarly had a field that was very similar to San Francisco. It was cavernous. Nobody could hit the ball out of there. They were recruiting pitchers. They couldn't recruit hitters. They moved the fence in. I do wonder out loud if San Francisco will arrive at a similar conclusion, because over the last 4 to 5 years, and really the tenure of Farhan Zaidi, they had tremendous pitching. They did an exceptional job of recruiting pitchers who were kind of on the rebound, most of whom did exceptionally well there, some of whom stayed, most of whom left. Blake Snell is the latest example of this, but Kevin Gausman, Carlos Rodon, they just did a wonderful job of resurrecting pitchers' careers. They have not had the same success on the offensive side of the game. And so as you look at their ranks within the 30 teams, they're in the bottom quartile offensively, almost in every statistic. So they're going to need to invest differently offensively, I think, to have their offense match their pitching. But I think, as you embark upon a new regime, headlined by Buster Posey, which is a fascinating hire. It's on the tails of, we've seen this in other sports. John Elway in football. You saw it in baseball with Nolan Ryan getting involved with the Texas Rangers in the 2010s. And then, Derek Jeter. And now here we have Buster Posey. Like, everything you hear about him is excellent. So I think there's a wave of the now that could really resonate with the fan base and lead to a real propelling forward. But I think the previous general manager, Farhan Zaidi, had a little bit of an uphill battle to fight. And, to segue into the exact example that Duffy brought up, you fast forward to Carlos Correa. It was an offseason in which they recruited Aaron Judge. They recruited Carlos Correa. And it wasn't a lack of money. I think ultimately Aaron Judge, who was from the Bay Area, chose to stay in New York, potentially because of the perception of his ability to put up, Hall of Fame numbers. I'm sure there was some element of who he thought was more advanced in their ability to win. So it's not been a lack of money. It's been just a lack of being able to seal the deal with some of those elite offensive players to balance out their roster so that they can get back to dominating again. They did it in an era where they did it through the draft. Buster Posey, Brandon Crawford, Hunter Pence. These were guys.
Lincecum.
And then the pitching has always been excellent. Lincecum, Kane, Bumgarner, Sanchez. Yep. These guys were excellent. They had this era where they were so homegrown. But when you think about those teams, by and large, they weren't built off of free agency. They traded for Jeff Kent at some point, but there weren't a lot of free agents on those teams. They were much more homegrown and traded for. And I think they're going to need to get back to that era. But as you talk about a guy like Carlos Correa, he is so uniquely wired from a standards of excellence. He aspires to win championships and he wants to be in the Hall of Fame. So he when he came to the Minnesota Twins, this was literally in spring training. He walked right into our food room and said, "We need to get all this candy out of here. Like, we're world-class, automobiles. Like, what type of fuel are we putting in our systems? Like, get this stuff out of here." He then went into our advanced scouting room and said, "Give me the advanced report." And he said, and obviously there was a lot of controversy around Houston, but he effectively said,
This is what the Dodgers, the Giants, the Red Sox, the Cubs, that's what these teams are doing. The Yankees, like this, we need to step it up. And so there was a standard of excellence that he brought into the Twins overnight that just transcended the whole franchise. And so, it's those types of players that you don't know specifically. I mean, you know what they're going to do on the field. You believe you know what they're going to do in the clubhouse. But when they start just totally overhauling your infrastructure, it's amazing the force multiplier they are to the franchise's success moving forward. And that's where Carlos Correa, I think, has been such a tremendous asset to the Minnesota Twins and will be, honestly, for generations to come.
Really interesting. Great comment. Great question, Duff. So Oakland A's, Thad.
Yeah. So Oakland is in a little bit of a different setting, I think, than San Francisco, in so much as they've clearly embraced the fact that they're rebuilding. So you also still have the infrastructure of when they were hyper successful still intact.
Yeah.
Billy Beane, David Forst, Farhan Zaidi, who left there, had success. Paul DePodesta, who was made famous in Moneyball, left there and had success and is working for the Cleveland Browns right now. And, has been a senior leader of that organization for a long time. But Billy Beane and David Forst have been there for a long time. There's continuity there. And, when you look back at the resources Oakland has had, they are then paltry relative to the rest of us, and they've done exceptionally well. There was a long time where they never rebuilt. Billy always retooled. He never rebuilt. And he always maintained this philosophy that if we get in the playoffs, you never know what could happen. Now, they haven't won a ton of playoff series. They haven't made it to the World Series under his tenure, but he had a lot of successful teams. And similar to San Francisco, they did it masterfully through the draft, but also by optimizing talented players for other teams that other teams didn't appreciate what they brought to the table. So, the Josh Reddick, the Brandon Mosses of the world, guys that, yep, exactly right. The Norris, these are guys who were never premium prospects, but Billy saw something in them due to their advancement in analytics that the rest of us didn't see, and he picked off every single one of these guys. There was always an adage in baseball is be very concerned when Billy Beane calls and proposes a trade for you, and take account of who he asked for, because that player is much better than you think he is.
Right.
And so I think they were just masterful through that era. Now the challenge for them, I think, will stem from where are they playing? They're going to be in Sacramento for the foreseeable future. How can they recruit free agents? Because I do think they're ready to turn the corner. Through all the trades they made of their exceptionally talented players, they've done the tough thing, which was trade great players for future talent. Now what they're trying to do is build back towards the standard of excellence. And I just question right now, the challenge associated for them is like, how are they going to recruit players to willingly play in Sacramento when they have other options? So for them to truly get difference-making players, they still are probably going to have to play on the margins for the short term. Wait till they have more clarity as to whether it's Vegas or elsewhere before they make the big investments. But that actually may time well for their farm system that they built out from all those trades, because those guys are going to start matriculating to the big leagues. Some did last year. More are going to come the next 2 to 3 seasons. That hopefully for them will align with when they get a new stadium. Without that, I'd have some concerns about their ability to truly capitalize on this window.
You talked earlier about the uniqueness of players who spent their whole careers with a franchise, right? And we all can quickly think of those names, people like Cal Ripken and Derek Jeter. Think about the NBA, Steph Curry jumps out, Tim Duncan. So as an A's fan, the hard part is you always know you can't get attached to anybody. At least in the last 15 years, you can't get attached because they're going to go. Yeah. Matt Chapman, a perfect example. Homegrown, great player. You see him progress as a rookie, and then you think, man, this guy's got potential. And then as soon as he really starts to hit that potential, he's gone.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's heartbreaking as a fan. It's really frustrating. Because you're constantly fighting uphill and you can't get attached to it. And then at some point you just say, you do what I do. Even before they announced they're moving, I was like, you know what? I can't do it anymore. I can't get emotionally invested in this team because I know they're going to be gone. That this player is going to be gone. And that's really hard as a fan.
Yeah. So I entirely agree with you. And I'm going to harken back to a player I've had a chance to work with for the last 8 years of my life and been very fortunate to watch, Byron Buxton, play the outfield. Yeah. He is oft injured, but he's an exceptional talent. one thing I asked him point blank, why do you keep running into the wall in the outfield? Like, why does this keep happening? And his answer was very clear. He said he feels he has two responsibilities. When the ball is put in play, he should record an out for the pitcher. He said, whatever it takes, I need to record an out. Secondarily, and to get to your point, he says, I play every game as if there's a fan in the stands who's never watched baseball before, and I have a chance to turn him into a Minnesota Twins lifer. And I'm not going to miss on those opportunities. And so I think it's that connection, Yes, we want our team to win. Yes, we believe in the name on the front, where it says Oakland, we believe in that. But you do get personally attached to the player, the player who maybe you catch a foul ball from him, or he throws a ball into the stands, or you have that chance encounter where he signs a ball for you. Or as Byron said, you get to see him lay out and make one of those Superman catches. Like, you are forever linked to that player. I think the struggles that you have in some of these lower payroll divisions, such as Tampa, such as Oakland, is you can never get attached to the players, because to your point, just when they start achieving stardom and they warrant larger salaries, they get traded. And then you have to have this inherent belief that they're getting traded for three guys, one of whom hopefully will become the next Matt Chapman or Matt Olson or, what have you. And so you do have that belief, because Billy Beane's done such an excellent job. David Forst has done such an excellent job, but it's hard to constantly have that belief, especially when they trade the one guy who did sign that baseball for you, or who did make that Superman catch when you were 8 years old, and you've become intrinsically linked. And now all of a sudden you're tracking the player more than you're tracking the team. And it starts eroding your fabric of your connection to that club. And you now are starting to track, like, well, now I'm a little bit of a Braves fan because I always loved Matt Olson, or I'm tracking, Matt Chapman's in our backyard in San Francisco. Yeah. Maybe I want to be a Giants fan. And so I do think that it is really, really difficult in some of those smaller markets to stay connected, because baseball is the only sport that is no longer, is not a salary cap. So we're not all playing on the same level. And so the success of Oakland hinges upon their discipline to trade those players every single time and not overinvest in them. That's a real tough message for a fan, especially a zealot, a fanatic, to really embrace.
Well, this whole concept has also been prevalent for Warriors fans, because we departed one of our homegrown guys, Klay Thompson, right, who won 4 titles with us, was a integral part of our franchise. So I'm curious for your perspective as a GM, when you have that kind of decision. So it's a different decision here. Klay, great career with the Warriors, obviously 2 devastating injuries. He came back, but now he's at kind of in the later innings, let's say, of his career. And the Warriors have a bunch of young talent that they want to get playing time for. So Dunleavy, Lacob, they had to make the hard decision of, okay, we gotta ship Klay off. And that was tough, right? So that division between kind of loyalty and continuity versus what's the right business decision for the team, that's got to be a tough one as a GM.
Okay, so let me answer that from the fan's perspective first, and then secondarily from the general manager's perspective. I would tell you, as a fan, I am, fundamentally, I'm not a Golden State Warrior fan, nor am I a Klay Thompson fan per se. But seeing the reception he received when he played his first road game there was exceptional. And
amazing.
I'm happy to say this. I'm not too proud. I teared up when I saw that. And I think that's the magic of sports, right? Is like, you see those moments that are so amazingly emotionally special. And all too often you see fan bases not receive those types of players' reunions well. Like that, in my humble opinion, that couldn't have been better handled from the fan base standpoint. I think the Warriors did a wonderful job. I think the fan base did a wonderful job. It was touching. Now, I will tell you this pains me to say it, but from a general manager's perspective, we are not in it for Q ratings. We're trying to do the best thing we can. We're either fundamentally trying to help the team today or help the team tomorrow. When we do neither is when fans should be most concerned, because then we shifted into trying to just survive rather than to thrive for the fan base. So to me, I've worked in environments, I've seen environments where the general manager, these jobs are wonderful. You want to covet them. They just start surviving. And so how does that show up? That shows up by you constantly are telling your owner, hey, we came in second place in pursuing this free agent, but we just didn't put in the last couple million to get him. Or we didn't make this trade, but in the long run, this was prudent. Like, as a fan base, I don't want my general manager winning the Prudence Award. That has no value to me. I want you to either be going for today or building for tomorrow. And the reality is, unfortunately, John Hart, who has been a mentor of mine and a long time exceptionally successful executive in baseball, he said, do not let stars set on you. And he said, aspire to every season having as many championship caliber players on your team, but never aspire to have the same championship players on your team. And his notion was the biggest mistakes he had made in his career, and he was counseling us to avoid, is this concept of you have to keep a guy throughout his career because at some point it just doesn't work out anymore. And, for better or for worse, the more tenure a player has, the more money they're going to get. So now you're allocating a disproportionate amount of your payroll to players who are well past their prime. That is a secret for a lot of failure in the sport. And so it leads you as a general manager having to not only make very tough decisions, but actually pursue making those tough decisions, because when too many stars set on you, you then have a bloated franchise that takes years to recover from. And so it's much more advantageous and tough to do for your fan base, but it's best to part way with some of those stars before they set on you, a year too early, a day too early, rather than a day too late, because at that point they become immovable objects.
Great perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that so far, it's worked out for the Warriors with Clay, and historically it worked out for the 49ers with Joe Montana moving on and allowing Steve Young to take over. But sometimes catching the timing just right on that is the big challenge. With that, I know Dave's going to call on crunch time here shortly. But before we get to crunch time, I wanted to ask you about your next steps in your career. You and I spoke yesterday. I know you're considering a few different options, including obviously a desire to stay in the baseball management, but perhaps also in the broadcast world, which I think if this podcast is any representation, that you're very well suited for. But a specific question for you, given what we've seen in sporting and given how analytics and personnel evaluation and sort of team building can really cross different sports very fluidly. We see now Bob Myers, working for the Commanders. Would you ever consider going into front office in another sport, whether it be basketball or football or pickleball?
So I guess I want to answer that question this way and say, I don't want to sound arrogant. These jobs are exceptionally difficult and take a lot of expertise, but I would love to work in another sport. I do think the skills that I've honed over my career are really more grounded in, crisis management, people development, executive decision making. And, my facility now with analytics has just evolved so much over the course of my career. I have passion for other sports. I think that's important. I have an appreciation. I also have a clear awareness of what I don't know. And I think armed with those things, I would be very interested to see how much that translates to working in a different sport. We have just done so much cross collaboration with other sports. Working in Minnesota, we're blessed to have a professional football team, hockey team, basketball team. We have a great women's basketball team. We've had more collaboration with Cheryl Reeve probably than almost any coach in our community.
Fantastic coach.
Fantastic coach. We're exceptionally successful. We have a professional soccer team. We have the University of Minnesota. So we've just had so many opportunities to cross paths and, gain a sense of best practices in other sports, to feel as if what they have done and what they brought to us from an expertise standpoint has enhanced our decision-making. Hopefully we have with them. I just think there's a lot more crossover capabilities there than ever there once were. And so the notion that you could only work in basketball if you grew up in basketball, or you could only work in baseball if you grew up in baseball, I think we have really disavowed ourselves of those thought processes. And I think there's a lot of things that I've done in my career that would translate elsewhere. And similarly, most of the conviction I have behind that is just seeing how much other people in other arenas have helped us propel forward. I would hope I could do the same for other industries.
Beautiful. Well, Thad, this has been amazing. We're now going to go into crunch time. The idea of crunch time is quick fire, but it always goes long. So yeah, good. Thad's rubbing his hands. He's ready.
Yeah.
Ooh, Duffy, you've added some exciting questions to crunch time. This is the crunchiest crunch time. Thad, favorite ballpark?
I would say unsung ballpark would be Pittsburgh. If you're sitting high enough, you get to see the Three Rivers,
Right.
you get to see the football stadium. It is beautiful. You stay in a hotel where you walk over a bridge to get there. It's an intimate ballpark, small ballpark, great fans, beautiful setting.
How you did not say the Oakland Coliseum is beyond me.
I have some great Oakland Coliseum stories that maybe we should take offline.
Yeah, I got some good ones
It
too.
avoids sewage.
I've got many. Best ballpark food.
Ooh. So, the funny thing is I've worked in baseball for 25 years and almost never eaten at ballparks, but I will say I recently had an opportunity. John Daniels, a great friend of mine, longtime general manager of the Texas Rangers when I was there, called me at the end of my tenure with the Twins and said, "Do you want to do something we've never done before?" To which I said, provided that it's not illegal, I'm in. And he said, "Let's go watch a baseball game as fans." We went to San Diego, watched the San Diego Padres play against the Los Angeles Dodgers. And I learned in that time frame that I was there that you can actually buy beer in baseball stadiums. And for 3 beers at $57, we got to enjoy a few beers. So that was the first time I had actually purchased concessions at a baseball stadium in a long time. So I'm not exceptionally well equipped to answer the best ballpark food because I was blessed to eat most of my meals in clubhouses with professional chefs sitting shoulder to shoulder with some of the players that were playing that night.
So you get the clubhouse spread. So when I was an intern with the A's, I was up in the press box, and it was a lot of hot dogs.
Yeah,
wasn't very exciting. Okay, Duffy added this one: chewing tobacco or sunflower seeds.
I must confess, I don't know if my mom's listening, but I chewed tobacco once in college, got violently ill, and have never chewed tobacco since. So I'm going to stick with the seeds. But I will say there's an advancements in baseball that it turns out eating things that are highly sodium enriched don't help your performance on the field. So we're moving away from seeds as well.
Okay. Shout out to my friend Colin Cahill, who works in player performance for the San Francisco Giants. I'm sure he's listening. Okay, go ahead, Duff.
This is going to segue to the next crunch time question, which I'll ask if that's okay, Dave. But
Please.
real quickly, friend of the podcast, Darren Banks, high school, a friend of mine. He and I and a couple other friends were on our way to a game of the Coliseum quite a long time ago. And Darren tried chewing tobacco for the first time. And we arrived at the Coliseum, and by the second inning, he was in the bathroom, violently ill. It just so happened that Nolan Ryan was on the hill that night, and Nolan Ryan, I think it was maybe his 5th no-hitter that he spun that night. And unfortunately for friend Darren, we checked on him in about the 7th inning, let him know that he was missing something special, but he was not in any shape to crawl out of there. So he missed that no-hitter. Which leads me to my our next crunch time question. So you worked with Nolan Ryan for a number of years with the Rangers, and I know colorful character, and I know you have some good stories. I'd like to hear them all on the podcast, but why don't we choose one, your favorite Nolan Ryan story?
Well, working with Nolan is like a just on the Mount Rushmore for me of my career. I mean, he just was an exceptional human being. I think what fans probably won't be surprised to hear is he's kind of equally intimidating in a workplace as he was on the mound. But he is one of the most family forward people I've ever worked with. He really brought together the Texas Rangers, made it something just a glorious place to work based upon his consistency and his commitment to treating everyone like a member of his family. So Nolan was excellent. I'll do the best I can do here, but had a little bit of a Southern drawl. And one thing I learned over my life is that my name is Thad, and the TH sound doesn't translate well in most foreign languages, but also apparently doesn't translate very well in a Southern drawl. So he kind of referred to me as Shad. But he told good old Shad a story one day, and it was effectively, I'll do my best impression here. So Nolan says, Shad, one day I was about to. It was the off season. Durwood Merrill was this, longtime umpire. And Durwood called me up and he said, "Hey, Train," he called me Train. That was my nickname. And he said, "Hey, Train, do me a favor. I got my nieces having a birthday party. Would you mind swinging by and signing a few balls?" I said, "Durwood, anything for you." He said, "Well, thanks, Train. They are really, really appreciated." So I went over to that birthday party and signed me a few baseballs, handed them out to some kids, and I hopefully made a few fans for the future. Then all of a sudden I'm pitching the next season. It's August. This is my last year. I know I'm going to retire, and I'll be damned if Durwood Merrill's not going to be behind the plate. So I call over to the umpire's room. I say, "Hey, can someone put Durwood on the phone?" Durwood gets on. "Hey, Train, what's going on? Do you know this may be the last time you and I hook up for our entire career?" He's like, "I'll be damned, Train. Have a great game tonight." So I go out there, I throw my first pitch. I mean to tell you, it's 6 inches outside. Durwood pauses and goes, "Hi!" And I'm pitching in the seventh inning. I got a no-hitter going. I'm throwing pitches like 6 to 8 inches outside the whole game, and I'm striking guys out. And Durwood just giving me every call of the game. And all of a sudden, somebody hits a little blooper over the second baseman's head. The ball lands in the outfield. I turn around to get the ball back from the second baseman, and I turn around, and I'll be damned if Durwood Merrill's not standing right next to me. He said, "Damn it, Train. I thought we were going to get a no-hitter tonight." And so things hopefully Vegas don't know at the time, but apparently that was a special moment for Nolan. But he was, absolutely exceptional to work with, learned so much from him. And his sons are very involved in baseball. Ruth, his wife, was an exceptional person, consummate Hall of Fame player, but also a Hall of Fame person.
One of the greatest brawls ever. What was it? Robin Ventura?
Yeah. So
yeah, kids, Google Robin Ventura, Nolan Ryan. It's great.
And so just a little backstory in that Nolan shared with us, and I won't continue with the accent. He said he found out later from Robin Ventura that apparently throughout that series, a lot of guys had been hit, and the Chicago White Sox decided whoever gets hit next has to charge the mound. And so he drills Robin Ventura, whether on purpose or not, only those two guys will know. Yeah. And Robin Ventura, I think if you watch the video, you can see in his face like, damn, it's me. Yeah. I guess I got to go do this. And so he charges out to the mound reluctantly, and Nolan puts him in a headlock and starts drilling him.
I love it. Okay, well, that's great, Nolan Ryan story. Favorite city to travel to?
So I'm not just saying this because I believe some of you guys may be proximate to the city. San Francisco is my favorite.
Oh, you're pandering, Thad.
Well, so here's the double-edged sword here is I've been to Oakland a lot more than I have been to San Francisco, just as a function of spending most of my career in the American League. So we would stay in San Francisco, both when I was with Texas and when I was with Minnesota. Restaurants, you just can't beat them. The scenery is gorgeous. It's just a beautiful place to be. And then you would go to arguably one of the less valuable stadiums in the league. So you were staying in the best city. Maybe it felt like it was such a great city because the stadium itself was not great. So there was a huge juxtaposition between those two.
Okay, that's a great segue. Where on the team plane would you sit?
So
talk us through the charter. Where do the players sit? Where do the GM? Talk about that.
Yeah. So what typically happens on a team plane is there's significant separation. So these planes are not conventional planes. They are configured differently. So there's a lot of 4 seats facing each other. So there's a lot of card playing going on. So one thing that happens when you get on the plane is what is called the traveling secretary walks off and drops off an envelope of money for your travel money for the
per diem.
The per diem. And so a lot of these guys who make a lot of money just proceed to gamble that per diem because that money doesn't mean a lot to them. So conventionally what you have is management and the coaching staff sits in the front. Players occupy the middle and the back part of the plane because there's a understanding that management shouldn't circulate too much throughout the plane because you may see things that you shouldn't, and they need to have their space. And so there may be a cocktail or two flowing in the back of the plane, as well as a lot of card playing. Management, by and large, stays in the front with the coaching staff. And so usually on a plane, whether you're reading a book or watching a movie, more often than not, I'm interacting with the manager or the hitting coach or the pitching coach and just understanding what are the challenges that they're facing and with personnel matters and try to do the best you can to support them.
So one of the more amazing stories that I've heard recently was, did you guys see the Wade Boggs story about his beer
consumption?
Drinking? His consumption. Yeah. So I can't remember the number, but Boggs was telling this story about, it was a cross country. I forget who he was playing. Maybe it was when he was with the Yankees and they were playing the Dodgers or something, but they flew across the country and he ended up drinking like 100 beers or some number that is astounding. And then he actually walked through like, whoa, I was having a beer every I don't know, 7-10 minutes. They keep bringing them, and then plane lands. We get to the hotel. Have a couple more. It's like, yeah, that was amazing to me.
He said one of his mentors was Andre the Giant. Apparently, his alcohol consumption. So not that we're not trying to have some fun, but I do think the game has evolved a little bit. We have started kind of measuring the alcohol on planes.
I would hope.
And so, and hey, listen, like mistakes were made, but most teams when they're traveling home, they don't have alcohol because the assumption is guys are going to get behind the wheel when you land.
Yeah.
There is more alcohol when you're going on the road, but even in that context, like they are trying to manage that a little bit better because it used to be, to your point, like there was almost a limitless amount of alcohol that was provided to these guys. And now we've learned like that is just putting them in real harm's way.
It was astounding to me. Okay.
Not recommended from an emergency physician standpoint.
Thank you, Duffy.
That's like K-Stay, but 3-4 cold. My goodness.
And at altitude.
Exactly.
And as a world-class athlete, expected to perform the next day.
Okay, Thad, you mentioned Nolan Ryan. Give me a few other favorite characters you've met along the way. I mean, in your long career in pro sports, give me 2 or 3 people who jumped out at you. I love the Byron Buxton story as well.
Yeah.
Anybody else that you want to talk about?
Well, let me speak about 3 players together. I was just so fortunate that this last class of Hall of Famers are 3 players I've watched their whole careers. And so Joe Mauer with the Minnesota Twins. Yep. I worked in Texas when Adrian Beltre was there. I worked in Colorado when Todd Helton was there. So I got a chance to attend Cooperstown this year and see their induction. And the fact that I knew each of those guys personally, I have all 3 of their jerseys in my basement. I only have like 6 or 7 jerseys. It's not something I've collected throughout my career, but they're all personally signed by those guys. That was an exceptional opportunity for me. And, speaking specifically about a few of those guys, Joe Mauer is just a consummate professional. He's not the most vocal guy, but he had exceptional leadership qualities, and his humility transcends most professional athletes, let alone ones that have the success and talent he had. As we talked about earlier, he could have played professional football, basketball, or baseball. He was one of the rare guys who actually chose baseball, but he comes across as one of the most selfless, humble guys you're ever going to be around. Adrian Beltre was probably one of the most entertaining players I got the good fortune of watching play for a long period of his career. He just had so much fun playing the game of baseball, and he wore that on his sleeve every single day. Like there was no doubt in his mind that he was going to let the opposing team know he had fun beating their butts that night, and he had no shame about that. Every fan knew he was celebrating the game of baseball every single time he stepped on the field. It was infectious. It was a blessing to watch. Another guy who I got to see play through a lot of his career, who was just such a complicated and complex guy, was Josh Hamilton. So for the fans who may not know, Josh was the first pick in the draft by the Tampa Bay Rays. High school athlete, superstar performer, misses about 3.5 seasons due to a real affliction of addiction with drugs. So he's high school educated. He's super talented. He has like size 19 shoes. He does things that just humans don't normally do. He's a drug addict. And he was probably one of the most relatable players I've ever been around. He cared genuinely about your family. He knew everyone's kids' names. He always asked about them. He was great around my young children. He was just a really, really warm, exceptional human being and had some real demons, so he was really exceptionally human. It took a lot of support for him to get on the field night in and night out. But when he did spectacular things on the baseball field. I was in Baltimore when in a 5 at-bat set, he hit 4 home runs off 4 different pitchers and hit a double off the wall for his 5th at-bat. And one of the more remarkable things was at the end of the game, he had no idea that he did it off 5 different pitchers. He thought it was the same guy each time. And, so like his ability to do things on the ball field, and honest to God, with almost no analytical help, it just was God-given talent. He just did things that people just don't do. His home run derby, fans go look at this in New York, was just out of this world. And like
incredible.
Anyone who's seen any sporting event in New York knows that they are hostile on visiting players. the whole stadium was chanting his name. The whole city was chanting his name as they were hoping he was going to continue to hit balls literally out of the stadium. You just don't see that in New York. And he did it. And it was just like, he's superhuman. And he did all of that hitting off of like a 70-year-old man who is his American Legion coach, who he had no idea was going to be able to throw a strike. But he knew he was going to share that experience with that man come hell or high water. And that mattered more to him than winning that contest. And lo and behold, it goes out and sets records in the home run derby. So he was just an exceptional talent. The leadership of Joe Mauer, the spirit and emotional connection that Adrian Beltre had with fans, in addition to these guys being massively talented, just was such a gift for me throughout my career.
Very cool. You mentioned Todd Helton. I saw Todd Helton and Peyton Manning eating together at a Denver restaurant a couple years ago. And I thought, Tennessee connection.
Right. And when we played in Atlanta way back in the day, and Peyton was still, he came and did a whole pregame workout with Todd, and it was fascinating to watch. He was taking ground balls at shortstop and throwing them to Todd across the diamond, and he still did the double tap that he always used to do before he throw a football. And Omaha kept telling him, like, everyone's going to be safe at first base. What are you doing? Like, do you think these guys are walking to first base? Stop with the double tap. Get the ball across the diamond.
Awesome. Well, Thad, so fun. This has gone way longer than our normal ones, but there's a reason, because you're really, really fun to talk to. I'll give one quick shout out. We're a Marin podcast. Our former guest, Will Venable, just got the manager job with the White Sox, so we wish him well. He's a great guy. He was a fantastic guest. So good luck, Will. We're rooting for you. Duff, you got anything for your former Haverford roommate, Mr. Levine?
Well, yeah, we won't ask him to answer any more questions. We'll do a shout out to Joe Ryan as well, pitcher for the Twins,
yes,
Drake High School star, pitcher in the Lodge. I think Joe's family's connected to the Lodge in Fairfax, a potential sponsor. Great spot, even if they're not a sponsor. It's a great spot. They got Joe's jersey up there. So yes. Yeah, Joe Ryan, shout out to him, and just a huge thanks to Thad. I think we had envisioned maybe a 30-minute interview with a focus on analytics, and now we are closing in on 2 hours, and I've just had an opportunity to hear some stories from Thad that I hadn't heard before and get his perspective. And obviously, I think anyone who listens to this will have a lot of confidence in Thad finding the next opportunity professionally. And I just want to thank you for taking your time and being generous with your time and talking to our little podcast and occasionally mentioning basketball.
Well, I love the experience. I love the opportunity, and it was a wonderful conversation.
Thanks, Thad.
Thank you, Thad.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Burke's on his feet. He looks up and gives me a grin and says,
Hey, dude, you too must be from Marin.
Marin County's A-OK, from Tampa, Stinson, all the way to MA. Fresh organic veggies in the market every day.